So we're going live on YouTube now.
Well, we've called this future proof, and you can handle anything. And I think that's something that both of us have found to be incredibly helpful in our own lives. So through learning about the understanding that we're going to be talking about, we have started to live lives that have a lot less fear about the future. And looking back at my own life, I know a lot of my anxiety and worry started around school and friendships and all these things, and it's very much a future-based thing. What happens if? How will I cope if? Exams, all of those kind of things. And I know that when I started learning about this, I was 23 years old, and I just thought, why didn't I know this younger? Like, school would have been so different, friendships would have been different, relationships, and it feels like it is this secret that no one told us. And when you start to learn about it, you're like, it makes life seem so much easier. So it's not to say that we don't experience worry or any of those kind of things, but our relationship to it changes. And I think we feel more resilient, we feel more able to deal with life. And it's something that I feel passionate about sharing, especially with young people, because it was that initial, why didn't I know this? Because so much of our suffering comes from this misunderstanding that we're going to be talking around. So I loved it. I think you came up with the idea of future proof. And it really does feel that you're learning about something that is teaching you over and over again that you can handle anything in life, that you've got everything you need to be able to cope with anything that life throws you, and that there's actually some deeper part of us that kind of already knows that. And I think that's the part we're speaking to in this webinar, that the part where you can hear this. So it might not make sense, and you might be like, when are you going to get to the point? But I promise you that there's a message in these words that I feel really grateful to Anne for creating this platform to be able to share with young people.
Yeah. No, thank you, Anne. My name's Dave, and I didn't have the privilege of coming across this at the age of 22. I had to wait a little bit longer. But I am eternally thankful, and I genuinely feel like one of the most privileged human beings. That doesn't mean I've always lived a privileged life insofar as my experiences of life. I've spent time in prison, having failed my college course, spent time in prison, drink, drugs, marital breakdown, psychological breakdown, numerous. But to be introduced to a conversation around the nature of our mind and reality was the thing that completely took my life and turned it around. It was such a simple thing. And like Jen said, it was one of these things where, why has nobody told us this before? Why the hell had I not realized this right? Why had I not seen this? Once it was seen, it was so obvious. But once it was seen, it wasn't like that was the end. It was like all of a sudden it was this new beginning. It wasn't a goal. It wasn't like a terminal point. It was simply a new beginning of a life that took on a very different shape, and a man who went from a very aggressive, violent, depressive man to one who I don't recognize anymore. That man who stood on top of Potter Fell one day, I live in the Lake District, which is after listening to a man named Sydney Banks who spoke of something called 3 principles. And I listened to him talk about the nature of reality and how everything is a construction of thought. Everything is a construction of consciousness. Something I'd never considered. But in one moment, my whole world changed. The moment I recognized a truth that lay in the heart of reality. And it wasn't the reality that I perceive. It wasn't in that. It wasn't that there was a truth in my feeling states or in what I thought or what I actually experienced as a reality. But it was at the heart of reality. It was at a point that reality is created. And when I talk about that, what I'm trying to probably not very well put into words is that the world that I lived in was a construction of my own mind. the world that I live in now is a construction of my own mind, apart from the difference is I know it. And before being aware, like I said, I lived a life whereby I was very much affected by the world. I was affected by people, or so it appeared. But to all of a sudden wake up and recognize that the reality that I perceive is mine. The reality that I perceive is the reality of consciousness and thought creating a reality within this organism that I call Dave, that experiences a life, that I experience as a life, and I call my life. And the moment I saw that, it was like life suddenly started to make sense. But at the same time, it opened it up to being the most massive divine mystery at the same time. As much as it made sense, it made no sense whatsoever. I understand now that reality and consciousness and thought are far greater than my mind can possibly even conjure up or begin to start to understand. Which in terms of my own personal life, I find life a very magical place. It's a place which is full of unknowns. It's interesting because when I look back, it was all the things that I thought that I knew about myself that were causing all the pain. It was all the things that I thought that I knew about the world that was creating all the suffering. So to start to wake up and start to recognize that reality isn't a thing that is happening to us. It is a thing that comes through us and we experience it. It's a creation of thought. It is an expression of consciousness. And to start to wake up to that is to start to wake up to something so unbelievably beautiful and mind-blowing. It can't help but reorientate a mundane life, a depressive life. It can't help but put a perspective onto a situation that will make life so much easier. It will help us become more compassionate with ourselves and with other people. It shines a light on our common humanity and our connection to the natural world. There is one of the things that I love to talk about in our talks is the natural world and the environment. And to me, the greatest cause of all environmental damage is the human being's idea that it's separate from nature. We ultimately are a part of a system that has been born into this earth. None of us, human beings aren't created by human beings in the same way as trees aren't created by trees. Human beings are not human beings' ideas. We're not one of our inventions. We're not one of our good ideas. We happen to be here alongside billions of other beings that take form in all different shapes and sizes. So as we start to explore this point, we start to recognize connection. And this connection is the thing that will help us have a far more beautiful life. Help us find that ultimately we are unbreakable. I'm not saying my physical body cannot be broken, but ultimately we're all psychologically safe. Ultimately, we're all psychologically unbreakable, even when it really looks like we are capable of being broken. Ultimately, there is nothing within us that can be broken psychologically.
And I think, one of the first things I realized when I came across this understanding, the thought that came to me is, I'm not broken. I don't need to be fixed. And I'd been in the psychology world and therapist world for 10 years, really trying to fix myself because I felt like I was broken. I felt like there was something wrong with me. I felt like I was different, and I struggled. As a young, primary school age, it was shyness and anxiety and worry. And then into teenage years, it was depression, anxiety, eating disorders, messing around with drugs and alcohol to try and feel different, try and take myself from one experience to another. And the only way really I could kind of communicate in social situations as if I drank, and that felt something I needed to do. And I then went on this journey of trying to fix that. There was something wrong with me. I shouldn't feel shy. I shouldn't feel anxious. I shouldn't feel depressed. There's something really badly wrong with me. And it was interesting because the training that I sat in on, learning about the nature of our own mind, learning about how our reality is created, didn't speak about any of what I thought were my problems. And I'd spent 10 years really focusing on those and trying to fix them. But it spoke about what is common to us all, how all of us are creating our reality moment to moment by this incredible power that we call thought and consciousness, and this intelligence that we refer to as mind. And out of that place, so many of the things that I thought I knew about myself, I think you mentioned it earlier, like what I believed to be true about me, started to fall away. I started to see that the construction of who I thought I was, a shy, insecure person. I'd been told that I'd probably struggle with eating disorders for the rest of my life, but I'd find ways to cope and deal with it. I saw all of those as ideas and beliefs, and I saw that ideas and beliefs aren't anything fixed or true. They were made of thought. There were thoughts that had occurred to me that I thought were true and I lived out of. And it felt like then, through that realization, there's this possibility of a recreation and a recreation, and a respect for all of it, and a respect and an understanding, because what is created through me looks real. You know, it's not that I came across this at 23 and I've not had a bad day since. You know, it comes and goes. You know, I have all kinds of feelings, but as I said at the beginning, my relationship to them has changed so much. I used to fear my feelings and I used to go to war with them and try and change them. Whereas now I've started to understand that at times we will feel anxious, and I know what that's from. But the difference is, before understanding where their experience came from, I would put it on an object or a person or a situation or my past. So I had a huge amount of thinking about who I was, and I blamed it on how I was brought up and my schooling or friendships. So they were things I couldn't change. So I felt very powerless. But the beautiful thing about what we're learning about here is that it puts you right back to this moment. What's happening now? What's creating your experience now? Yes, we have this phenomenal memory where we can bring to life things that have happened in the past and feel them now. Something that's made us feel happy, something that's made us feel sad. Sometimes when we've lost someone we love, we can bring that to life through thought now and experience it now. We can imagine exams, we can imagine job interviews, we can get anxious about that now. But you start to see, well, if that thing isn't actually happening and we can experience it now, where does the feeling come from? And it's something I'd never really asked myself before. I just very quickly blamed my past, schooling, exams, job interviews, friendships, for how I felt. And suddenly it was like this whole reorientation to, where is the feeling coming from? If I can be laying in bed absolutely terrified about something that I have to do the next day, like speak in class or any of those things that used to terrify me, I remember thinking, but I'm in my bed and I'm safe, but I'm experiencing terror. Where does feeling come from? Where does experience come from? And it really was just an open-ended question. And I feel like what we're talking about is brilliant in that it's never about convincing someone of this, or telling you what to believe or how to think, or trying to positive think things. It's asking people to consider for themselves and then learn from their own experience. And I think that seems to be what happens for people. It kind of shakes what they think they know. And then new thoughts start coming to us that never occurred to us before. And from that place, we start to learn and grow and recognize that the times where, you know, at 5 years old, you're absolutely devastated because you think your friend doesn't want to be friends with you anymore. And it's the biggest deal in the world and it's everything to you. You know, and then when we're 10 years old, we'll laugh at that. When we were 5, we used to get really upset about silly things. And then as we get older, we think these things are more important and more worthy of our suffering. So finances and interviews and exam results and all those things. But I think the nice thing about this is it's the freedom to go out and explore and to play with life and to recognize you can't get it wrong. And we often say to young people that we're working with is, we're not saying don't study, we're not saying don't, revise, but we are saying that the amount of pressure we put on ourselves, the importance on these results and things, that's coming from our own mind. That's not coming from the actual exams or the results. And any of those things in the world aren't defining who we are. Because who we are is so much more than what we think we are. And I think I didn't know that before, and I'd limited my potential so much. And I feel like now I get to travel around the world and work with people from all walks of life. I get to speak at conferences in front of 800 people, 1,000 people. And that would have been on my list of never going to do, would prefer to die than do that.
I might die whilst doing it.
And you get to surprise yourself with what's possible. And that for me is such a big thing, because I was such a shy, anxious person, and there wasn't a huge amount I thought was possible in my life. And through simply starting to see and put back together the experience that I lived in, I've gone on to surprise myself. And things that had terrified me have actually happened sometimes in my life. And the way I've dealt with them has been very different to how I imagined I would. And I've seen that all of that rehearsing isn't necessary. That in the moment we will get given what is needed to deal with situations. So it feels like it's the greatest freedom and the opportunity to keep learning. And it's despite circumstance in the past, despite who you think you are, what you think is possible for you. I'd say go away and see, are you the exception? If we're saying there's something here that's true, are you the exception? Does this work this way for you? And just play with that a bit.
Mm. Yeah, we call this future proof because Jen and I do a lot of work with kids around the world, really. And we got invited out to Nepal to do work in the foothills of the Himalayas, because in the villages in the foothills of the Himalayas, they have a big problem with teen suicide, of all things. You would never have thought that, but that was the case. And 2 days before we turned up in this village called Pippaldanda, a young man had committed suicide after getting his results from his education. And we've worked in South Africa, we've worked in Dubai, we worked in loads of places working with kids. And it's really interesting. You see how much there is this emphasis on the future. You see how much people are living a life now for a future. Now, I can only really speak from my own personal experience, because that's the only thing I can truly speak about. But in my own personal experience, I didn't do particularly well at school. I didn't really fit into the academic model so well. And I failed my college course, which was an HND in something I was very good at, the environmental studies. And within 6 months of that, I landed myself in prison for violence. So at that time,
22 years old?
Yeah, 22 years old. Given the way that I understood the world at that time, I thought my life was over. It was a very humbling moment. I was heavily into drugs to try and suppress feelings that I didn't like, and to try and cope with the everyday today living. And one thing that I got to learn was that how I did at school did not shape who I was. It didn't determine my future. The more I've started to see into life, I realized that the only thing that truly stands between me and doing something that I want to do is a thought. I can find a way to do anything. This is something that has become more and more evident to me as I've gone through my life. I'm not, so like Jen said, we're not saying don't work hard at school, if, do your best. But again, understand that our best changes. I used to do a lot of fell running, and that's running around mountains in the Lake District. And some days I'd go out there and I'd do this fell, I'd be like, nailed it, must be getting fitter. 3 or 4 days later, go back out and do a fell, and I am blowing out of my backside. It's like, it was hard as hell. Both times I did my best. You know, and likewise, sometimes when Jen and I do talks with people, sometimes our talks go well, and sometimes our talks don't feel like they've gone so well. It's not that we haven't done our best, but our best changes on a moment-to-moment basis. We have to learn to realize that and to accept that. When we do our best, understand the best changes. But so much of my life got easier when I stopped trying to live for tomorrow, or for next week, or for next year, or for 10 years time, or for this or for that in the future. You know, life becomes very, very difficult when we start going into realms of time that don't actually exist, or places that don't actually exist. The future ultimately doesn't exist. It is a construction of our mind. It is a construction of thought. How we think about the future will be how it appears to us. So one of the gifts that starting to wake up to the nature of reality is to start to wake up and recognize that the whole thing is taking place in a moment. That life never leaves this moment. This moment is life, the birthplace. It's the birthplace of creation. Now is the birthplace of creation. It always has been and it always will be. It's the thing that never has gone anywhere. If we check the time now in the UK, it is Monday the 20th of May, and it's 25 minutes past 6. It's now. When I check my watch in 20 minutes time, if I actually remember, it will be now. But at the moment, that time doesn't exist. It is simply a projected thought. It is a thought within consciousness about a subject, which is the time. So starting to wake up to thought, starting to wake up to consciousness, starting to wake up to the realization that this whole thing is the most uncomprehendibly beautiful, mind-blowing happening. When I woke up, and I keep saying the word woke up because it truly was a wake up. It truly was this most amazing wake up whereby I started to recognize that this whole life thing isn't what I thought it was. I personally, if people are put off by this word, please forgive me, because it is a word that comes quite loaded. But I started to wake up to the spiritual nature of life. And when I speak about spiritual, I'm not talking of any religious thing. I'm talking about an unknown, a mystical magnificence that my intellect cannot get its head around. But just to have started to get a glimpse of it, just to being able to get a glimpse of this simple fact that life isn't what we think it is. Life is an illusion of our mind from birth till death. And you can see this. You can really see this when you start looking around at the people around you, the people who you know most, the people who you spend the most time with. It's like sometimes I look at Jen and I look at her and I'm like, what the hell? What are you doing? Why would you do that? Why would you say that? It would be like, I look at Jenny sometimes and we perplex the hell out of each other sometimes, don't we? We're like, we spend 24 hours a day together, we work together, we live together, we sleep together, and it's like we see different worlds. We don't always see eye to eye. You know, we do have conflicting opinions from time to time, and you start to see that these conflicting opinions are born of thought. But these conflicting opinions, each conflicting opinion looks very real to the individual who is perceiving it. So you can start to get a sense of the nature of this stuff when you just simply take a couple who they can never see the world the same. I cannot jump into Jenny's consciousness and experience her world through her eyes, and neither can she jump into mine. And then you kind of take this point, and then you don't just look at a couple, but you start to look at humanity as a whole. covering the globe, and you've got like 7.6, 7.7 billion human separate realities. Separate realities, a reality that is unlike anybody else's. Why? Because we all think different. And no two people can have exactly the same thought. It'll always be their thought. So starting to wake up to the nature of separate realities, to start to shine a light on our own reality. If there are 7.7 billion human beings on Earth, and each of us is experiencing our own separate reality, whose reality is the truth? Whose reality is the true reality? And it has to come back to one thing, and that there is no true reality in experience, apart from the fact of experience. When we start to recognize that, it allows us to do something really beautiful. It allows us to become skeptics. And a skeptic is somebody who doesn't take what is seen or heard at face value, the question. And to be given the opportunity or the gift to start to question your own mind and what you think is one of the most freeing things that anybody can ever come across. Because when we start to become skeptical of our own minds, we start to become skeptical of the experience or the feeling that we're living in. Why am I feeling like this? That person over there did it. They pissed me off. How old are we going out to? Anna.
I have my microphone off. Teens and 20s, so you're all right.
Okay,
you can say what you like.
That person over there pissed me off. It allows you to become skeptical. You can take that at face value and assume that is the truth, that person over there has somehow managed to create this physiological reaction within your body. Or you can be skeptical and question it. Is that actually possible for somebody to release hormones and chemicals within my body? Is it possible for Jenny to create the feeling of anger within me? Why is it sometimes she does something and I can get really pissed off about it, and other times I can laugh about it? If Jenny had the ability to make me feel, or if anybody had the ability to make people feel, life would be so simple. We'd all just make people feel stuff. We'd make people feel happy when they're down. We'd make people feel down that we wanted to upset. But we don't have that power. The only thing that has the power to create experience is the birthplace of experience, consciousness and thought now, ours, which takes us from being a victim of life to being ultimately the most powerful thing you can possibly comprehend. We have been born with the gift to create reality. We have been born with the gift to dream up nightmares and future scenarios. And we've been given the ability to remember the past, another chapter of time that doesn't exist outside of thought. And we have been given the gift to experience all of it. When we know it's consciousness and thought, you realize you cannot break it. You cannot break thought. You cannot break consciousness. It can't be damaged. It can't be scratched. It can't be dented. Why? Because it doesn't exist within the realms of the physical. It is an energetic force. Life is this life force that is happening through each and every single one of us. And what Sydney Banks with the 3 principles unearthed was an explanation for how it comes about, for how it takes form, should I say. So with that in mind, life starts to become so much more interesting, so much more free. You find when you know it's thought, you're not confined to a certain range of feelings of between love, happiness, joy, all these great feelings that we love. And we don't kind of feel the need to shy away from other expressions such as sadness or grief or worry. You start to recognize what it's all born from. And the moment we recognize that this whole thing, whether it is love or it is fear, it is all an expression of consciousness, all born of one place. when you know there's only one place to look, that eliminates an infinite amount of other potentials that exist outside of ourselves. It's the most beautifully humbling thing. It's the most beautifully humbling thing. You realize everybody's special because everybody is this. Everybody's beautiful. Even people who do the most horrific of things, they do it because their thinking makes sense to them. But when we start to recognize how it works, how life works, that skepticism starts to kick in. And I once heard describe skepticism as being one of our greatest gifts. And I totally agree.
A lot of what you just said.
I think one of the beautiful things about this is it allows you to stay present much more of the time. Not all the time. We have to understand, the nature of mind isn't a linear thing. It's not something that you can. Mind can go from us at 3 years old to us at 15 years old like that. It doesn't take time. Mind can go from happiness to sadness like that. It's not a time-based thing, isn't the mind? The mind is not bound by time. The mind is free to go anywhere. It's free to dream up anything. And so to start to recognize that, and when we do find ourselves worrying about future scenarios, our exams, work, relationship, all this stuff, you start to recognize this is simply an expression of our consciousness creating our reality. You quickly wake up and realize you don't have to live through tomorrow now. You never know how we're going to show up tomorrow. Likewise, yesterday's been and gone. We can go and visit it and float. The only place we can go and visit it, we can't jump in the car and go back to it or fly back to it. Likewise, we can't jump on a plane and fly to tomorrow. You just recognize that the only time we truly ever have to get through is this very moment. And that right there will bring us back to sanity. So much suffering is created, stress, worry is created through the idea of a future, which ultimately doesn't exist outside of our own mind.
Well, that's lovely. And as you were speaking, I had all sorts of questions come up and I've completely forgotten all of them now.
That happens.
So before, you've both spoken about how insecure you felt when you were younger and so on. I'm just interested in how much preparation did you do for this talk, for example?
We found the Zoom link.
We spoke about the titles. We threw a few ideas about, and that was one that just came to you.
It was when I thought back to my own life.
But I think what I've loved is that there's times where it feels like preparation is necessary. And I write a few points down. And before doing this call, we were making videos about a program we were running in Sweden. And we'd written down some bullet points to help us remember. And we did some preparation. But it is really interesting to see what happens when you are just in the moment. So much of my worry and anxiety in public situations or social settings was worrying about what I was going to say, or if they said that, then what would I say, and how would I react, and what would my facial expression be? And I didn't realize how much of that was the thing creating all the anxiety, like all of this thinking about other people's thinking, about how I'm going to be in the future. Whereas now I feel like I do get to be more present, so I can feel a bit nervous, but I know that feeling nervous is coming from thought. It's not coming from what I think it is. It's not coming from doing a webinar. It's not coming from social situations. It's coming from the way I think about it. And understanding the nature of thought is that thought can bring us all kinds of things. It's not limited. So whereas before I'd have the thought, oh, I don't like talking in public, I don't like doing webinars, I won't do it. It's almost like, oh, it's all right to feel nervous. It's all right to feel anxious, and to know when it's time to prepare and when it's time to actually just be in the moment and see what comes up. And there's been times that we've prepared things and then not used any of it. And there's been times when we haven't prepared anything, we wish we had. But it's like you realise it's all learning. And I think one of the things you often say is you can't get life wrong. And we'd actually never know if we had, because we haven't got anything to compare it to. And I think so much of my life was spent not wanting to get it wrong, not wanting to get the answer wrong, not wanting to get life wrong, not wanting to look wrong, not wanting to say the wrong thing. And there's all this idea of that there's a right way to be in life and a wrong way. But to know that we're all going to be different, and that's okay. And we can experience all feelings. Feeling anxious or afraid or worried isn't life being wrong. It doesn't feel nice. And sometimes that can be an indicator that we're really lost in thought, and it can wake us up. But it's not a judgment thing. Like, this isn't about thinking certain things and not others. It really is about understanding how all of it's been created. And I think, I came across this 2005, for the last 14 years. And initially I thought, when I understand this enough, when I've been on enough courses or learned enough, then I'll just be happy all the time. But I've actually grown in respect for all of the feelings and all the experiences and expressions. And one of the nice things, we were talking to someone the other day, and Dave just said, what if you were dreaming? And someone just kind of tapped you on the shoulder in your dream and said, right, don't wake up, but just know that you're dreaming. What would you dream? And then it's like, well, what if somebody in life told us that we are dreaming up reality for ourselves? Now, don't wake up. You're not gonna leave that mode of existence. You're still going to be creating reality in this way. But know that it's being created through you. Know that the reality is coming through thought and consciousness. What would you create? And it feels like
what would you be scared of?
It kind of, that you're safe. You've got that psychological safety. You've got that knowing that it's a dream. What would you allow your mind to dream up? And I think it really struck me as you were speaking to this person, because I just thought it's such a great way of describing this, because it can seem, one of my early insights was, wow, it's like I've been at home in bed dreaming. I've always been safe, but I've been dreaming nightmares, and I've been terrified, and they felt so real. And this understanding was almost like going, oh, no, but I've always been at home in bed safe, I'm all right, but I've been dreaming nightmares. And it was like a brilliant metaphor for what I'd been doing with my own life. I didn't know that I'd been creating so many imaginary things to be frightened of, that the thing that I was scared of was my own mind, my own feeling. And I put it onto external things, but I didn't know that those things didn't have any power. And I think to really start to see this, we often say it's like severing the cord between this outside and inside, that there isn't anything outside of us that can create a feeling, good or bad. When I think that Dave is making me feel all the love that I feel, it's a lot of pressure.
Lots, as you can imagine.
It's a lot of pressure on him. But I'm aware that sometimes you can do things, and I'm like, that is the cutest thing. It's so sweet. It's so funny. Other times it's the most annoying thing. I want to, punch you around the face. But you start to get a sense of that. And I think that's why it's so helpful in relationships, because you start to see, God, I get really caught up, and what I create looks real, and so does everyone else. And I think the compassion you can find and the understanding, even for people that do things that we think are wrong to us. And I used to be quite judgmental, and I'd held grudges for years against certain teachers, actually. I remember realising in this 3-day training that I was on, I was like, wow, I'm the one that's actually had to feel that. And they were doing the best they could given how they think. And actually both of my parents are teachers, and I know how much, love they had for the kids, and how much, I don't know, how much they tried their best for the children. And, a teacher who'd made one comment to me that I thought was the worst thing, and I'd held it against them. It's like it puts all those things in context. Given what we think is how we then act. And if we don't know to question what we think, then we just keep acting out of that. And this sometimes just gives us a bit of space.
Mm.
Sometimes just like, wow, I normally react like that in that situation. If someone says that to me, then I say this back, and we get into arguments. But it's almost like it diffuses things, because you start to see your own part to play in your life. And one of the other things I only realised probably about a year ago was I'd often speak about how my sister bullied me. And then I had the realisation I had to be an active participant in feeling bullied. Because some of the behaviours that I was telling Dave about that my sister did to me, I was like, what? That doesn't sound very bad. Me and my sister used to hit each other around the head with Henry the Hoover. And we've done this, and I knocked her out.
Henry took a right kicking.
And it's like you start to see, so my feeling of being bullied came from me interpreting what was said or done to me in that way. So it's not saying that bullying doesn't happen, but to feel bullied, we have to think bullied. And that was something very, that was a year ago that came to me. And that had been a big part of my story. When I was growing up, my sister bullied me. Yeah, she did certain things that were unkind, but the feeling of being bullied and victimised came from me. So that's what I love, again, about this understanding. You'll keep realising things, you'll keep seeing things and uncovering things.
And from that, what I hear in you is a victim dying.
Yeah.
It's like you realise the victim only exists when we believe that somebody or something has inflicted an experience upon us. But when you come back to this point, when you truly do recognise that this is a fact, that reality is an expression of our mind. The world looks to us how we think. People look to us how we think about them. Which is why people like different people, which is why some people find Jenny attractive and some people don't. Some people find me attractive or found me attractive and some people haven't. Why? It's because people think different. It's why some people want to do the job that they do and other people don't want to do that job. It's because we all think different. Why some people are this religion and not that religion, and it's because we all think different. Why people have different political beliefs, because we all think different. Why we all vote for different political parties, because we all think different. But to each and every single one of them, their reality looks true and real. I mean, this is a monumental happening. This is a mind-blowing happening. Reality is coursing through us, not coming to us. But I was just thinking about if there was anybody that I could just talk about. And there was a couple of lads that I remember when I used to go and talk in prisons. When I first came across this, it was like, having spent time in prison, I know that there are some really good people incarcerated for doing some stupid things. People make mistakes, and people pay the price for that. It's not to say that there isn't a consequence to people's actions. So I've been into prisons and I've spoken, and I remember one lad, he was a Jehovah's Witness lad, and he argued with me the whole time. And this was a talk, I think it was about an hour. It was predominantly owned by this lad who just wanted to argue with me and just tell me that what I was saying was nonsense. He's ended up in prison because of that dickhead over there. He hadn't fucking done that. But the next week I went in, and this lad came running up to me, and this lad was bouncing. He was happy. He was just like, he was all over the spot. He was like, Dave. He said, I've been waiting all week for you. I have to tell you. It's true, isn't it? It's true. It really is. I said, what do you mean? He said, what you were saying, it's all thought. He said, it's true. He said, Dave, can you believe it? He said, I found freedom. These were his words. He said, Dave, I found freedom and I'm in prison. He said, Dave, these fences and these walls are not my prison. He said, my prison's been my own mind, but I didn't know that. And there was another lad one of the first prisons I ever went into. I was speaking about, I used to work with a charity called User Voice, and User Voice was about rehabilitation of offenders. And I went in and we were talking with my friend Lee, who was an ex-Liverpudlian gangster. He'd been a nutcase. He'd done an awful lot of drugs and fired a lot of guns. And I adored this man. He had this very deeply profound wake up and dropped a lot, which shows that this is true. You know, it's not just through three principles. Three principles are a metaphor to try and describe the nature of life. But Lee stood up and spoke about his recovery from drugs and alcohol, and I stood up and I spoke about the recovery from the torment of my own mind. And at the end of this lad came up to me and he said, Dave, you know, what did you do? Tell me. And he was staring at me like, Dave, tell me what you did. He said, because I get really, really pissed. I'm always in freaking prison because I get pissed because I hate how I feel. And then I do stupid shit. He said, I've got a criminal record so long now. The moment I do something, I'm just straight back in. What did you do? And I just said to him, I said, I knew they had to be off the wing to go back to work. This was in Preston prison. It's a category A prison. And this lad, I said to him, have you got access to the internet? He was like, no, I'm in prison. I'm like, yeah, sorry about it. Can you get books? He's like, no, I'm in prison. All right. And this poor lad, he's just stood there and he's staring. His name was Sean. He was just staring at me. I was like, right, all right, quickly. So I said, come over to the quiet end of the wing. We walked over there and all the other lads were kind of just wrapping up and stacking chairs. And I just explained to Sean what I said at that time in my life and how realizing that reality is a magical expression of consciousness. You know, the world, and we look to ourselves how we think. This is the amazing gift that we have unwittingly been born into. That reality is that our whole life is a ball of thoughts, a gift of pure creation in any moment. And I just talked to him about that. And after about 5 minutes, this man's face, Sean's face, just totally changed. And he just looked at me and went, oh my God, life's as simple as that, isn't it, Dave? I said, Sean, it's as simple as that. And with that, he gave me the most enormous hug and he thanked me and he walked off the wing. And as he was walking off, one of his care women, one of the women that look after them on the wing, she was tiny, she come strutting in and she looks at Sean, she goes, you all right, Sean? And Sean goes, yeah, I'm really good, thanks, miss. And with that, she just spun around on her heels and she said, what the hell did you just say, Sean? And Sean turned around and went, I'm really good, thanks, miss. And she went, what the hell do you mean you're really good? And with that, Sean just said, I'm really good, thanks, and walked off. And she came wandering up to me and Lee. Lee's a good 4 inches taller than me. I'm 6 foot. And she's staring up at us like that. And she goes, did you say something to Sean? I just said, yeah. She said, what did you say to me? I said, so I told her what, ran through roughly what I'd said. And she was like, that's amazing. Could you please put together a program? And I want to get this into the wing. So I put together this program, and that was the last that I ever heard of it. But having gone into other prisons and spent time in the prison system, I see the bureaucracy and the bullshit that just blocks things. But the beautiful thing about this was, what happened for Sean was he saw how life worked as opposed to how it didn't. And the majority of human beings will live out of the idea of living a life thinking it works a way that it doesn't. So Sean went from being an affected man by the world to realizing the only way he can feel affected is via his own mind, which is a lot less to take on. When you think you have to change the world in order for everything to be all right, when you wake up and realize you're all right, even when you think that the world needs to be different, there's nothing broken. And the moment our thinking changes, the whole situation changes. It's like you realize there's nothing, you're not powerless. So 3 or 4 weeks later, I got this email off this care woman, and she just said, I've been chasing up your program. She said, but I have to tell you about Sean. She said, he hasn't got into a single fight since that day, and he was fighting daily. He's happy, he's buoyant, and he's going around each cell and he's telling all these, the lads on the wing what he's realized about life. She said, Dave, he's a different man. And I have no idea where Sean is now, and that was the last I ever got to hear of him. But what I've had the privilege of seeing is that people can really wake up to this, and the moment they do, it will transform their life. They will realize that they're not limited. They will realize that that they're all right no matter what. No matter what the exam results, no matter what the work situation, no matter what the financial situation, they're okay. They're okay. And I feel like it's the greatest gift is to start to recognize that, and start to recognize the nature of reality, the presence of now, the birthplace of all, birthplace of creation, the birthplace of every single moment, the only time we ever have to get through. And to me, that is future-proofing at its ultimate greatest.
The one thing that came to my mind when you were saying all of that is, how about somebody who, for example, has been raped? I can see how all that you're saying makes sense to the people that you've been speaking to, but I can imagine someone who maybe has been raped saying, yeah, but that doesn't apply to me. That, like, it might sound as if we're saying that they're creating that reality.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to point out to people. We're not saying that what happens to us we create. It's not that we're not saying that you create that situation. And my heart would go out to anyone that had been through that experience. But I do know that people can go through that experience and be okay, because I've seen it again and again. And
we've also seen people who've gone through it who've really struggled at the same time. And
there's not a wrong and a right. And I think that's the important thing to know. And it's all right to feel sad. It's all right to feel hurt. It's all right to feel angry. All of those things are okay. But to know that there's nothing within you that's broken if you're experiencing those feelings, and that you're whole, and that the beautiful thing about our own minds, if we leave them alone, they can overcome anything, and we can be gifted new thought and see things in different ways. And doing the work that I've done over the last 14 years and going around the world filming people from all walks of life, I don't know if we've got somebody on film talking about the experience of being raped, but I do know that we've had conversations and turned cameras off at different times. And it has been interesting, because I met somebody who realised that she was not to blame, and her life mission was to really help other people that had gone through the same thing, and she created that within her life. And then I knew somebody else who had then gone on to just feel awful and almost like it was their fault, and it actually attracted more abuse in the future. They said, put themselves in situations, and that it was through coming across the principles that they saw how that thing happened, and then they thought about it and all of the feelings that they had and had been so afraid. But then through learning that there's this incredible gift of mind, that we can have a new thought and a new experience, and that the only way we can experience something traumatic that's happened to us is through thought now, and that we're built to take that. We can experience any thought. It's not going to harm us. But the more that we understand that's what it is, we don't feel so victimized by it. And I know that people have found compassion and forgiveness. There's people that have got comfortable with the fact that they're not sure they'll ever forgive. And it's very individual, but we're not saying that things don't happen in life. We're not saying if a bus is coming towards you, don't jump out the way because it's just thought. But we are saying that the only way you get to experience the bus coming towards you is through thought and consciousness. So it's not a wrong and a right thing. And it's a good thing that you bring up, because I think people sometimes, will ask that question. I always, when people said it to Sid, sometimes I'm not saying this chair doesn't exist that I'm sat on. I'm saying that the way that I experience it is coming to me via thought. And different people have a different opinion about this chair. And a moment ago, before I thought to say that, I wasn't thinking about the chair. It didn't exist for me in that moment, but my body was still sat on it. It's a very different way of looking at it. But I'm glad that you brought that up, because otherwise it can sound flippant, or it can sound uncaring. But I feel like through this, we get more loving, we get more understanding, and working with people that have had these kind of things happen in their life, to see how people can come out of the suffering of that, and they don't have to relive it again and again. or if they do relive it, they've got a different relationship to it, and it doesn't define them. And to know that, you know, that unbreakable spirit that we all have within us is there, no matter what, regardless. And I think that was something I didn't know before. I thought people could be broken. I thought there was good people and bad people and evil people, but I see that, you know, people make mistakes, and it's given me a lot more perspective and understanding for people who've done all kinds of things. And I think, you know, being able to go into the prison system in California and meet people who were just so kind and open and willing to share, and some of them had done horrific things. So people do horrific things. Given what their thinking is saying in that moment, and they act upon it, they can do all kinds of things. But they can also be capable of you know, compassion and love and all kinds of things. And it's knowing that to be true. And I always remember a lady called Kathy Casey speaking about going into the prison system. She said it's not that everyone's going to hear this, because she teaches this in prisons. So she's not saying just release everyone, there's consequences to actions. But she really saw the potential in people to change. And I think that was what people felt, from a lot of love and a lot of seeing their potential and seeing that unbreakable spirit within them, regardless of what they had done. And I think it does change our relationship to all kinds of things. And we maybe find more peace in our own life through not carrying around so much judgment and hate for people. Because I know I had so much judgment and so much thinking about people and what they've done, and it's been me that's carried that. And through this, it's meant that I have a nicer experience, and I get to see people in a fresh light, and not be as judgmental, and also not judge myself when I have been judgmental, when I haven't found forgiveness for people. That it's, you know, you're all right. Thank you.
No, I loved everything you said just then. Yeah, when we talk about the reality stuff, we're not talking about the matter. It's like, it's the experience. You know, the only way that we get to experience this conversation is via our mind. The whole thing takes place within our mind. And one of the things that I like to quite often ask, I started asking the kids in Nepal, I said to them, where do you see me? And they're like, over there. Where do you hear me? Well, over there. We're so quick to attribute our experience to external. But when you start to look even at the physiology, you recognize that it's all pointing within ourselves. It's like the eyes don't take in an image, they simply take in light. And the image is created within our brain and consciousness. The image is sight is an experience that takes place within. I'm very lucky. I'm looking up the Lake District, and it's very beautiful. It's a beautiful sunny day, and I've got a birch tree just outside that I see the leaves dancing in the wind. And for all the world, it looks like the thing that I am seeing is external. But when you recognize how the eyes work, you recognize that even the experience of vision is something that takes place within. The image that I see outside is within. And when you look at when I asked them about the hearing, where do you hear me? And they point over there. It's a very easy thing for us to mistaken, and it is where I believe all our misunderstanding starts, is when we start buying into an external reality. There is no sound between the microphone that is speaking out of the computer now, or the phone, and the eardrum. There is simply a movement of air molecules. They've just got the sound waves. There is no sound. Sound is the experience created once those sound waves hit the eardrum, go into the brain, messages, however that. It's too complex for me to comprehend, but just to understand that sound is an experience. This whole thing, reality, is an experience that takes place within an individual's consciousness. And the moment this consciousness kind of departs the physiology, these senses don't have any use. They cease. So it's like this whole life thing is an experience. And I feel like it's something that that when we start to recognize this, that there is no reality outside of our mind that we could ever know. There is no reality outside of consciousness that we haven't dreamt up. It turns life into a playground. Because going back to Jen and talking about the dream, when you wake up from the dream and start to recognize it is all thought, what is a dream? Well, it's all thought. It has to be. It can't be anything other than thought. When you start to recognize that there aren't two modalities of working, there is just this constant consciousness and thought in constant creation, whether we've got our eyes open or closed. You know, you start to recognize life becomes fun. It becomes fun, you know, and one of the greatest gifts that we have is the ability to learn. And as we learn, we grow, and as we grow, we learn. And it's like the evolution of fun. And when I say fun, I don't just mean happiness. I mean, I am so thankful for the shit times that have happened to me in my life. I'm so thankful for them because they have helped me grow and they've helped me learn. And all that time I thought I was trying to avoid them. But there's part of me now that once they start to show their faces, which they do, I have gone through hard times this last few years. But there's been this part of me that's slightly excited. What am I going to learn from this? And you realize that there's a gift of knowledge at the end of all the hardship. There always has been. And you realize that it's all just one play. All just one play.
And also to know that it's not a time-based thing. And I think one of the young people we work with out in South Africa is 16 years old, who constantly inspires us. We've continued to speak to her since August. She came to an evening talk that we did for teenage girls in the Jewish community. And we put this event on because a girl came to us, a 17-year-old, and said, my friend's suicidal, I don't know what to do. And we said, well, would she come and speak to us?
She'd attempted suicide as well.
Yeah, she'd been in a treatment centre for 6 weeks, 10 weeks. And we said, we'll get your friends together and we'll talk to you about this and you guys learn about it and then you might find different ways to be with her.
See if you can get her to come. Or she won't come, she said.
So then we did this 2-hour talk to a group of girls, not really thinking that she was part of it. And then towards the end, this sort of small voice pipes up and she said, so it's almost like you get burnt by fire and then you spend your whole life fearing it and you never get to experience its warmth. And she said she saw that she'd had a feeling that had become scared of, and then she never got to experience the beauty and the rest of things that come in feeling.
Or her own mind.
Or her own mind.
She becomes so terrified of her own mind.
And she then, since then, has come out of her depression and she's been going through exams. She's had all kinds of things have been thrown at her, but she's living it in a completely different way. And we continue to speak to her maybe a couple of times a month. And we've said to her, this isn't because we think you need it. It's because we love everything you say. And it's nice to have a reminder sometimes, but generally it's just because she comes out with things that wisdom isn't a time thing. It's not an age thing. The amount of wisdom that she's shared with us, the insight that she's had is incredible. And that was sitting in a 2-hour talk. She just heard something and she said she can't put it into words. And she said, it's not like I understand, but it's like understanding.
Not like I understand it, it's like it understands me.
Yeah.
Is how she described it.
And she's phenomenal.
Yeah. She got to bear witness to this whole thing is the beginning of such an enormous conversation. A conversation that a conversation can't do justice to. You know, you can't summarize. A word is such a limited thing. We're talking about the thing that allowed human beings to create language, the power of thought, an infinite realm of possibility in any moment. And just kind of starting to get an appreciation for that is to start to get an appreciation for the Creator. And there's a big name for the Creator in the Bible. It's like to start to recognize we did some work in a refugee place in South Africa, which was for physically injured refugees. And this man who was a Catholic priest, but he'd become disabled during a football match and in a wheelchair, he he really woke up on these 3 days that we did. And he described it as that he said, I always thought that God was this thing outside of man, looking down far, far away, casting judgment and watching our every move. And he said, I feared that God. He said, but I've suddenly come to realize that this God that I was so afraid of was within me. This creative force, it is me. Somehow, he described it so beautifully. He just said, somehow I am that God that I feared. It's like all these ideas of life had just collapsed, and he'd recognized it was all born of one place. It was again another beautifully profound man who we stay in touch with, and he's since asked us, or he's been put us in touch with people in the Congo to go and work with bringing tribes together and religious leaders together within the Congo to help explain to them how the only difference is only perceived by a thought. And how when our thinking changes, the world changes. And society changes, individuals change, and then families change, society changes. It's like it all starts and ends with thought. It's all born of thought. But when we are not aware that thought is 100 going on all the time, it's the only thing that's ever happening that's taking place is this power of infinite potential or consciousness taking place. When we're not aware of that, we will assume that reality exists outside of us and it is being inflicted upon us. But to turn it around 180 degrees and realize that whatever you're pointing at, if you turn your finger 180 degrees, or some people say, if you point that way, you've got 3 fingers pointing back. It's like you realize then it's all a state of mind. And this when people start to wake up to it, we did some work in a soup kitchen and in Cape Town in South Africa with homeless people, and our friend came out and she was so devastated. She's a very rich Jewish lady. She was like, the problem's too big. The problem's too big facing South Africa. Look at the state of it. All these homeless people, all this, all that. And Jenny and I both looked at her and went, no, the problem isn't big facing South Africa. The problem can be, it's so simple. It's so simple. It's unbelievable. All people have to do is change their minds about one another. It's that simple. When people change their minds about one another, they will see each other differently. And when they see each other differently, their interactions will be different. South Africa will change once people's minds start to change, because South Africa is a product of thought. It always has been, and it always will be. The moment thinking changes, the power of thought created this entire social structure that we have. It created money, a thing that people think their happiness depends on. When you realize it's all created of thought, it's a belief system. It doesn't exist in the natural world. It's all just a concept of man's mind, yet we put so much happiness, our happiness depends so much upon it, so we perceive. But to recognize there is nothing that creates happiness other than thought is to really start to find freedom.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so it's just been absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for all of that. And all of your links will be on our website at thesecretofeverything.com. So if anybody wants to get hold of you there, they can do. And also they can write comments or questions underneath the video on YouTube. Thank you so much. That's been really, really, really good.
And good luck. Can we just send loads of love and good luck to everybody that watches this? If you are watching this from a young person or any person's point of view, really, we just want to wish you loads of luck and loads of love.
Yeah, you certainly can. That's lovely. Thank you very much. See you again soon.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.